There is an unfathomable amount of stuff inside of society. There are loads of different chemicals, good and bad, that are contained inside of the environment around us. Everywhere you sit, stand, travel, walk, run, cycle on a day-to-day basis contains loads of different things that are unfathomably complicated and unimaginable to both you and I. And that's what's interesting about the world. And it would also be naive of me and you to think that 100% of these chemicals in society were good for us, but it would also be 100% naive of me to think that there was so much stuff in there that's bad and that we should get rid of all the bad. Everything in this world has a negative and an opportunity cost. Nothing, and I mean nothing, is free and totally positive for you. There is always some kind of con, drawback, flaw to every single thing you do inside of your life, and it is making the decision between having 90% negatives and 10% positives and 10% negatives and 90% positive. These are the important decisions that we have to be making, not just get rid of this and your life would be good, get rid of this and your life would be good. It has to be making the better decisions. Every single thing you do on a day-to-day basis is based on what decisions you make. And I guess the way that you progress in life depends on how good your decisions are on a day-to-day basis. Your life is made up of days, and if the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis are bad, then your life will, I suppose, also be bad. But if the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis are good and positive, then your life will be positive and you will reap the benefits of those good, positive day-to-day actions. And as I mentioned before about lots of stuff in society, and there's lots of stuff that is bad. There's so much stuff that is bad that it's almost impossible to track. I do a lot of research about different chemicals in society because science interests me, and that's just what I like to do. I know it's weird, but that's just me. And I've discovered things about plastics and non-stick pans, whatever it is, you name it. I still do normal research on food, diet, nutrition, and all that sort of stuff, but I also like looking at things that are sort of out there in the wider space of the world that could potentially be affecting you and I, and all the different stuff that happens inside of us. And these plastics, some of the plasticizing chemicals, do admittedly affect some of our hormonal systems and some of our body systems in general. And some of these chemicals I like to bring light on because I think there is a simple and easy way for you to avoid a lot of their exposure. But a lot of these chemicals, I don't even know they exist. A lot of chemicals that are bad inside of society have already been banned, but some of them are still out there. You think of BPA, right? A lot of consumer society knows about BPA now, and that's a really good and positive thing. And a lot of companies are doing BPA-free stuff, and as much as BPA-free is good, I suppose, I've also done research on a lot of the alternatives they used, and is it really that beneficial for things to be BPA-free? It's all a sort of a negative and an opportunity cost you never really know, essentially. But it would be naive of me and you to say that plastics are nothing, plastics are too useful for society to get rid of, and we should just live with it, even though BPA is known to cause things like miscarriages and infertility and like underdevelopment of babies and just general reduced sperm quality, reduced testosterone, reduced hormonal system function, loads and loads of bad stuff, essentially. It's just not good news. And these are chemicals which are now known to society and can be phased out. Scientists aren't stupid and can think of alternatives. And hopefully one day, once we've sort of, maybe if BPA-free stuff is still bad for us, eventually we can think of stuff that is free and it eventually becomes good for you. That is how sort of, I guess, trial and error in a way of what's good for you and what's bad for you actually works. And eventually we can progress towards a more chemically clean society. There's a lot of stuff that is in our bodies right now that are unnatural chemicals that me and you don't really know about. It's kind of interesting, kind of scary, kind of terrifying. But as I say, it all does come down to making a decision. Is that little plastic Tupperware food container that you take to your work or school every day and put lunch in too useful for you to get rid of right now? In the long run, maybe you can find an alternative when you have time to sort of think and like learn about new things that you could use to put food in. But for now, you're not going to get rid of that because that means you're not going to be able to have lunch. And that is not worth it to you for the potential short-term benefits you can get from early no BPA exposure inside of your food. It all comes down to a decision. But as I say, it would be naive of me to say to get rid of every single toxic chemical that exists on Earth and totally progress to a more clean society. Because there are things that humans don't come into contact with often. I'm sure this paint that I actually painted this on the ceiling and the wall when I was a little bit younger, maybe around 2-3 years ago now. I'm sure there was plenty of toxic stuff inside of that paint, but I'm not going to now sit here and say I'm going to repaint this wall. I'm going to strip this wall from the bare bones and start again so that it's not totally toxic, because that's just a stupid thing to do and would take up too much time. Time is the thing that basically holds us back from completing. Time is the thing that holds us back, I suppose, from actually being able to realistically achieve a totally net clean society. If you think of something that seems like such a positive, completely positive thing, that there are no negatives and no drawbacks on, the drawback will always be that it takes time. Nothing is free, because even though there's some information on the internet that's free and you think that that is a totally net positive thing because it's free, it takes time to process that information, do whatever you're going to do with that information, and that means that there is some kind of drawback. If time is infinite, then that drawback wouldn't exist and the world would be a totally different place, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole that I do not want nor need to think about right now. And as much as there's stuff in society that I wanted to talk about in this video about how we could potentially progress and stuff, but I kind of talked about that in videos previously, and I wanted to talk about diet for the rest of this video, because diet is a whole nother ball game. That's what we put inside of us. You're not going to eat paint even though it's toxic. You're not going to start eating non-stick pans, eating plastics. I really hope that's not the case anyway, but the stuff that you put inside of you on a day-to-day basis has to be good, because what you put in, you get. If you put in bad stuff, you will probably get fat, and things will start to happen to you that you probably don't want, and in hindsight you'd probably regret. But every single food that you eat has a drawback, and this is unrelated to time. Obviously, there's the drawback of time, wasting time when you're eating food, but if you didn't do that, then you die, so that doesn't really actually work as a drawback in this scenario. But there are so many healthy foods that I suppose have some kind of drawback, and everyone sort of argues on the internet about eat this, no eat this, no eat this, no eat this, no eat this, because one person knows about the drawbacks of one thing and the positives of another thing, and one person knows the drawbacks of that thing and the positives of that thing, and it just goes on as an endless silly little spiral on Twitter of people arguing about vegan versus meat eating diets, as much as both plant groups and meat food groups have their benefits to society and have their benefits to you as a human being when it comes to diet. You think of meat, a very, very nutritious food for you to be eating. Chicken has so much bioavailable protein and is nutritious. Red meat contains a lot of B vitamins and all that sort of stuff. However, red meat contains myoglobin, which means that there is a 3% chance of you obtaining colorectal cancer when you have 50 grams of red meat a day on average. Then you've also got the issue of meat being particularly quite bad for the environment because of a lot of the intensive farming practices and the amount of land and water that it takes up. There's a drawback to every single thing that you eat, whether it is even to do with your body or not. It could be to do with the environment as well. That is something that you have to consider. And then when you think of vegetables, you may think vegetables are all perfect, no negative things whatsoever. And I'm sure I could do some deep research into every single positive and negative thing about every single different kind of vegetable, but that would be stupid, because I know that there are negatives and positives to every single thing that we eat. You think of things like spinach, which contains so many goddamn nutrients that it basically is 99% nutrients and water and then like 1% calories. The problem is that these plants, they don't want to die, and that means that they contain plant defense chemicals. A lot of green leafy vegetables like kale and spinach, and I think there's some stuff like cabbage as well, contain a lot of oxalates, and oxalates aren't really good for you at all. They're things with carbon oxygen double bonds, and I think they can cause like kidney stones, and they can cause a wide variety of other things that are still bad for you. And then you're also going to have other plant defense chemicals like there was this one thing with like a bunch of phosphates on it that I saw was a plant defense chemical, and that was contained inside of a couple of vegetables. And then you've also got the issue of pesticides. A lot of pesticides are sprayed on vegetables. You don't have some farmers going up to cows spraying a bunch of pesticides on them. That just doesn't happen. They have to spray it on the vegetables because otherwise the bugs will eat that. I don't really think that any bugs are going to be eating cows anytime soon, unless we're living in some kind of weird, screwed up, inverted world. But anyway, there's a lot of pesticides inside of food. There's a lot of pesticides inside of the just general bioaccumulation of stuff. You think of fish. Fish are quite healthy for you. No, they're not, because they contain a lot of heavy metals from a lot of fishing poisoning. You think of fish. Fish is quite good for you. A lot of fatty oils like omega-3 and omega-6, so essential for you. But also, the other problem is, though, is that they contain a lot of toxic heavy metals because of a lot of water pollution. They contain a lot of just pollution in general from the kind of plastic chemicals, from plastic pollution in the ocean and all that sort of stuff. There's a drawback to absolutely every single thing you eat. And it's honestly, I'm starting to think that it's worthless considering the drawbacks to a lot of the if it's seen as sort of healthy, you think there's probably some kind of drawbacks to oats. And if I did loads of deep diving research on that, I'm going to start to think, oh God, should I replace my evening porridge because these oats have lots of pesticides sprayed on them and this, that and the other. But I'm not going to do that because I don't want to put my mind through that sort of opportunity cost scenario, because thinking about that takes time as well. Everything has a drawback, and I find this so interesting to think about. And honestly, it is literally just thinking about the 10%, 90%, or the 90%, 10%. And I do not mean to say this in a way that, like, eat whatever the frick you want, because it's not really going to do anything. Fast foods and all the sort of processed foods and stuff, they're still bad for you. They're like the 10% positives, 90% negatives kind of thing. And things like unprocessed meats and unprocessed vegetables are like the 10% negatives, 90% positives. There's quite a stark contrast there between the two food categories, even though they are sort of made of the same kind of thing in a way. So steer clear from the stuff that you probably know deep inside of your mind that is unhealthy for you. But stick to the unprocessed stuff. Stick to the stuff that you know is good for you, because of course there's going to be a drawback to it. Of course there's going to be a drawback to the red meat. Of course there's going to still be a drawback to some of the vegetables that you eat on a day-to-day basis. Of course there's a drawback to the fruit that you eat. Of course it's got high fructose levels. That's not really good if you're kind of getting off of a sugary diet and you're already quite insulin resistant. That's really not the best thing for you whatsoever, and it's probably best you go onto a majority savoury diet. There's negatives to absolutely goddamn everything that you have in your diet, and it all depends on your specific personal circumstances, on your personal, I don't know, whatever the hell you can possibly imagine. There's just so much stuff in society. Consider that there's no real point in just really stressing about everything that could possibly be bad for you out there, because in the end it's kind of becomes negligible. It kind of just becomes worthless thinking about it. And as much as it's a good thing to talk about this kind of stuff and dedicate time to it, it's worthless stressing whether to pick spinach over chicken because one's healthier or the other, and listing all the cons and pros and stuff like that, because they both have their benefits and they both have their drawbacks. There's no point in going, straight up extreme vegan or extreme carnivore, because vegetables have their drawbacks, but so does meat. So it's like you can't exactly pick a side. That's why whole foods and balanced diet, just keep the simple little mantras with you. Do the things that you know in your gut are right for you, and you will literally be fine. Just don't give in to the dopamine urges in your brain. Listen to your gut, not your brain, and you will be fine. I promise you. Just suppose a little quote I could say is, don't stress about being healthy in this kind of way, and it will just come to you with time, as long as you have the right mindsets. I'm sure that a year ago I wasn't as healthy as I am now, and I haven't exactly stressed about my health in a weird sort of way. I've just naturally weaned myself off of processed foods, and I've naturally sort of become more aware of the dangerous and toxic chemicals that are still yet to be banned by governments inside of society, that are still yet to be banned by the global sort of consensus and governments inside of society. And naturally, as I take in this information, I will just start to shy away and steer clear of them. That's all you kind of have to do. It's a slow process. Of course, BPA accumulating over a lifetime may cause your wife or you to have miscarriages and your children to be infertile and underdeveloped. But if you think about it, now it's not going to do a whole bunch except lower your testosterone slightly. But in a year's time, when you slowly maybe get that stuff out of your life, you're going to be fine, and taking it slow and not stressing about it is probably the way to go, because stressing itself is bad, and that's also an opportunity cost. But with that, I recommend subscribing for more content like this, and have a good day.